Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us in another episode of Speakin's Managing Change series, where we bring the finest of experts from around the world to answer some of the most burning questions to you. I hope everyone is doing fine and you and your families are keeping safe in the current times. Moving on to the very interesting panel that we have for today, I would like to introduce Ms. Iti Rawat, who is in discussion with our esteemed panelists for today. Iti is the director and the co-founder for Think Called Training and Consultancy, an award-winning startup which is also named top 5 in the country in terms of diversity, and also the founder of Women Entrepreneurs for Transformation. A very warm welcome to you, Iti, and thank you so much for joining us and leading the discussion for today.
Thanks a lot, Himanshu. It's also an honor and pleasure, especially looking at the esteemed panel today. It's a pleasure and a great honor for me to be here and introducing all of you. First of all, let me start immediately with Mrs. Sutapa Sanyan. She is the diversity and inclusion expert and advisor on leadership, gender equality, and an ex-director general of police. She has done some tremendous amount of work in police, especially in the to end the violence against women and also in the Human Rights Commission. She was also appointed the advisor in CARA Committee. CARA Committee is the Indian nodal body for adoption of Indian children under the Ministry of Women and Women and Child Development, Government of India. She has also been a key member to drive Kailash Satyarthi Children Foundation, Bachpan Bachao Andolan, and she's a public figure now and quite an eminent speaker in various big, huge events. And her work towards humanity and her humbleness definitely knows no bounds. We really would like to welcome you, Ms. Sutapa. We will quickly we will be introducing Dr. Anil Kumar Mishra. He is a stalwart of human resource industry, and we have got huge things to learn from you, Mr. Anil. You have started your career in human resource management in hotel industry like Oberoi Hotel Groups and moved to Capgemini and then Tesco. You have been VP and global head in HR in Just Dial Limited and ex-CHRO of Fidelity National Finance. Currently, you are holding a position of Chief Human Resource Officer for Magic Bricks, the dynamic startup, which is already making a huge name. And it's amazing to see how you have covered in HR the industry from manufacturing all the way to hospitality, then e-commerce, title insurance, consumer internet services. And you have also been covering most preferred companies to work in India. We would like to welcome you with our hearts, and we will also be introducing Mr. Mahesh Sharma, who would be joining us just in a short while. Because of some technical difficulties, probably he is just on his way. Mr. Mahesh Sharma has been a veteran in Air Force and leadership and organization development consultant. After serving Air Force in India for almost 25 plus years, and have handled leadership roles in staffing, training, and HR. And here comes Mr. Sharma on the screen now. We were just about introducing you, Mr. Sharma. It's a perfect timing for you to be here.
Thank you so much. There was some technical glitch with the link which was sent earlier, but okay. Thanks. Anshu is my man Friday. He saved me the trouble. He forwarded me the link. Sorry to the other panelists. For a slight delay?
No problem. Let me just finish your introduction, Mr. Sharma. So you have, after serving Air Force, you have been also Associate Director of Leadership Academy of Dr. Reddy's Laboratory, Chief Consultant in Behavioral Transformation and Coaching, GM Head in Organizational Development at Laurus Labs Limited, Talent Development Partner at Mylan for India and Emerging Markets. A great exposure in operations and HR management. I think this would be a perfect team and panel to talk about what and how we can actually manage a bigger corporation. So let me start and jump at the questions directly, and I would love to start it with you, Mrs. Sutapa. Would you like to please talk about and at least start with a few words that you would like to talk to your audience today?
Well, first of all, let me thank Speakin for having brought all of us together. And I think it's going to be an interesting discussion because it straddles across genres, different genres of organizations, from police to the corporate to the various details of the corporate world. But I always feel that although there may be a lot of differences between organizations being organizations, they have to be run in a particular way. They need particular kind of leadership, and in this changing, world, which I call the VUCA world, is changing. It turned out to be more VUCA than we were talking about. So it's so volatile, it's so uncertain, it's so changing so fast, and so all those things are there. And so I think you've managed to put together a good panel which can give a broad spectrum of and answer a lot of questions related to these organizations.
That's great. How about you, Dr. Anil? Would you like to address and start off and say a big hi to your audience today?
First of all, thank you so much, Iti, for making me feel like a celebrity by that wonderful intro. And very fortunate, very lucky, very happy to have wonderful panel. And I'm looking forward to a lot of learning. And good evening to all the participants who have logged into this live podcast. And I look forward to some exciting conversations with the audience as well.
Great. Hi, Mr. Mahesh. We have already heard from you. Just say a big hello to your audience as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's really very humbling experience because, to connect with a larger audience, and especially with the co-panelists who have so much of experience they carry with them. I think it's a privilege to be here, and thank you, Speakin, for having me over on this. Though I got slightly delayed because of a technical glitch, but I think we made it in good time. So I'm looking forward to more questions and thoughts to share. Of course, everybody has a different way of managing large teams and organizations. So let's see as we go forward. Thank you.
That was an exciting one. Thanks a lot, Mr. Sharma. So, Mrs. Sutapa, let me start with you first. I'm sure that audience are very willing to hear about the differences between police and corporates in management for large number of people. And we would really like to understand that how exactly you manage such a big, huge, large chunk of audience there.
Okay, as I said, they are absolutely different genres, and there are a lot of differences. But I think, seeing the time factor, I'll just concentrate on three of the differences, the most important ones. The first one would obviously be the organizational goals. They're obviously different of a corporate world or of a police setup, and since the organizational goals are different, so obviously the products which are to be delivered will obviously be different. The key drivers would be different, and the means of, say, measuring the productivity or the means of measuring success in the police will obviously be very, very different from what it is in a corporate setting. Because the goal of the police organization is obviously to provide a situation where the law and order is under control and crime is under control, safety, security, so that the other entities are able to manage their organizations in a safe and secure environment. Now, two other differences spring from the first one. And the second one, obviously, is the challenges that the organization faces. So obviously, it's different from the police, the challenges which a police organization faces is different from the corporate one. So what are the differences? The differences would obviously be, the challenges would be that the product which the police delivers is unfortunately is largely negative sanction, right? So that is the unfortunate part of it. The second challenge is they have to be there 24/7. Being the most visible arm of the arm of governance, 24/7 is their timing of duty. So that is another challenge. And the third challenge is that any action on the part of any individual, and when I say this, the post-Floyd environment in the US is something which comes to my mind. So the action of even one individual can have very, very far-reaching consequences, as we are seeing the unfortunate consequences in a country so far away from us. And the third important difference would be that, given the other two, there would be different skill sets which are required by the police organization compared to a corporate setting. And accordingly, the capacity building would also be different.
Yeah. Sure. Speaking of which, it's actually a crisis time, and you very rightly pointed out that every individual matters in any kind of setup. So, Dr. Anil, I would like to ask this question from you: that in this crisis time, how do you exactly keep the organization together? What are your motivation factors? How do we make sure that the organization do not go amiss at this point of time?
Broadly, I look at this entire phase, COVID-19 phase, and there are, irrespective of the kind of business organizations we belong to, we represent to, everybody has gone through or will be going through broad three phases. Number one, how do we survive during this critical phase? So that is almost passé right now, in a sense that every organization have had their plan, probably in terms of delaying their increment cycle or being probably going for a little bit of pay cut just to be surviving. So that phase is almost over. Second thing, what all of us are doing right now is, okay, how can we and how quickly we can recover back. So recovery is top on our agenda, and hence, people are going digital, and, even hospitality, airlines, and plenty of other sectors who can never think of going digital are right now reinventing the wheel and getting into those kind of a digitized mode. So that is all part of our recovery phase. And third one is what every one of us got to do in order to get onto that excel phase. So third one is, can we get into again the double digit growth, 40+ percentage of growth quarter on quarter? Is that possible? If we have to target that, what is that corporates got to be doing right now? So in the entire scheme of thing, we know, certain unfortunate activities also we got to be doing, which is probably not fair. But then, ultimately when it comes to survival and recovery of your business process, then, organizations are biting the bullet and, exploring all possible means and measures to, bring the cost under control and bounce back to business. So precisely that is what is happening. Now, motivating people. So by and large, if you talk about corporates, probably one comparison, if I can do, unlike a police force, here, people would not want to be, under observation. So they want a free hand. Policing is strictly no. Probably it hampers the productivity level. Probably people are not liking the fact that somebody monitors what time people check in, what time people check out. People would want to know that, hey, and then second difference is probably this is not vested authority, meaning you hold a specific portfolio and hence by default everybody has to respect you. Unfortunately, in corporate world, that's not the truth. If I can make the life of Iti better and if I can help her in any way, then probably, I would develop that authority. I would develop that respect. And specifically when we talk about India having this competitive advantage of, demographic dividend, specifically when you have young bunch of people, the average age of, our kind of an organization is it hovers around 28, 29. So you need to start thinking, acting and behaving ultimately with an objective that how can I enable them so that they are happy and they give their best. Now that happiness has also got, multiple dimensions attached to it. I need to know what is the aspiration, what are the needs people have. Different category of people have got different needs. So once we get into identifying those needs, and if we can have some intervention in place to address them, then probably that is how it will motivate.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. But it's very interesting to understand that how the top level decisions are made at the centralized way, and then it needs to be trickled down, and that too at various levels. Mr. Mahesh Sharma, would love you to throw some light on this. That how exactly you make sure at the top leadership position to for the decision to be ensured and implemented till the Z level.
Yeah, so that's a very, very pertinent question, because the importance of communication under such unprecedented situations cannot be underscored. You know, it cannot be underemphasized. The thing is, what you do in the peacetime is what is going to carry you through the the wartime, so as to say. You know, there's an old saying in the armed forces, and having come from the Air Force, I would like to repeat that saying: the more you train in peace, the less you bleed in war.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, what happens is, and that is having seen both the worlds, both what Sutapa is talking about, police force like an organization, even Air Force, and the corporate world, having seen both the sides. What I would say is that we talk of simulations, we talk of what if something happens. But in the corporate, because a day-to-day work is, the priorities are so fast developing, it's a war every day there. So what happens is, you are dealing with one phase, then you are on to the second phase in a VUCA world, as they say it. Whereas in case of the armed forces or in police organizations, the thing is, it's very, very uniform. There's a uniformity in ethos, there's uniformity in the language for interoperability, and there's also a uniformity in how we have the same purpose. Now, when it comes to communication, the channels are well laid out. You know, there is decentralization at the local level, at regional level, and stuff like that. And another thing is that it is much, much well laid out, because everybody, whether it is a police organization or the armed forces, rises from the same level of the DSP to the Inspector General or the DGP, having gone through the same kind of training. Whereas in case of a corporate world, you can laterally join like a module. Okay, now you may be coming from a different industry experience. The first thing, and which is very foremost in a corporate world, talking of corporate world now, is to have that kind of a system in place where the communication is passed on through a system which is very well laid out and which understands the gravity. So what happens is, what if the contingency planning has to be very, very perfect? Unfortunately, in some of the organizations which struggle, I would not name the organization, they do not create leaders, they create managers. And communication is very, very important in this. So to answer your question briefly, I would say that in the corporate world, the corporate organizations which have done well during this period are the corporate organizations where the second line and the third line of leadership is as good in communication as the first line, because leaders make a decision. It is percolated down through their managers. Now, are we training the managers for this situation is what sets them apart. That is where the learning and development is very, very important. And as I said, the more you train in peace, the less you bleed in war.
Yeah. Speaking of that, would you like to also add upon the learning and development for us? Because that's my favorite part too. We are from the learning and development company. So how exactly you make sure when you are picking the pieces from different modules and you're bringing them together, how exactly we make sure that they are on the same pace and there's a leadership development program, and how important is coaching and learning and development for each and every individual in the organization?
It's very simple, Iti. If the learning is something which I have to force, it's no learning. The learning should actually start with the business need. Unfortunately, what happens in most of the cases, it is a typical case wherein, what you have on the platter is served to you, not what you want. So what is the business problem should be the start of your learning agenda. Not what the learning team has got to offer.
Absolutely.
What keeps, I would say in terms of learning and development, when there are diverse requirements, I think the development has to be a there should be a segue between different teams. Let's say the junior managers, the managers, and the senior leaders.
Yeah.
When it comes to leadership agenda, the learning at different levels, how do I translate the learning which is effective for them at that level, so that it fits like a jigsaw, Now what happens is, let us say, if a person who's an individual, when he becomes a manager, what is the kind of learning which is occurring? Is he becomes a manager by default, or is he undergoing a structured training, which I find in police organizations is a wonderful thing, which somehow in the corporates which struggle are lacking. You go through that system wherein the learning from at each level, hand-holding, coaching is really very, very effectively followed in case of a police. And Sutapa would bear me out when it comes to mob control, modus operandi, or any kind of, skill. It is a proficiency level which is different, but people go through the same kind of a training. So even if your leader is incapacitated, your manager is available there to hold the fort. It is the last man standing, because they know that what is the interoperability, what is the common language. And coming to your question, to answer in briefly, so in order to see that the learning of different skills is actually universal, you have to actually create learning programs based on the business requirements for each level, so that it is understood. A person who's sitting at the shop floor does not understand the jargon which a leader does. He needs to be told the behavioral outputs that is expected of him. That is where sometimes we go wrong.
Wow. I'm definitely going to steal a lot of these lines from you and talk to my clients about it. Ms. Sutapa, I would love to understand from you on the leadership part. As a woman leading a very, very male-dominated area, specifically the forces, how was your experience, and what would you like to add to that part?
That's a very interesting question, Iti. Well, let me go back to the training days, right? So I landed up, this was 85, so I landed up at National Police Academy and then looked around and I found I was the only woman in that batch, right? So, and it was long time back, so yes, I had to go through that entire spectrum of stereotyping. Parts of it, remnants, you can look around and you'll find them there. But then, as Mr. Sharma said, we were given the same training, right? Even if I was a lady officer, a female officer, and there were 73 or 76 male officers, but the training was the same, right? How much I could rise up to it, how much I could imbibe is a different story. That depends on individual capacities, as you rightly said. But this common training, it gives you the confidence, right? You're made to ride the horse also, you're made to do cross country on horseback also, you're made to do rappelling, and everything, they would be the same. There is no difference. So that is a big thing which brings out a lot of confidence from inside you. It makes you understand, you suddenly, because see, I came from a middle class Bengali family back of beyond Bihar, Patna, and my schooling was in a convent school where girls and boys were never encouraged to meet and all that, and then suddenly I land myself in this place.
You were handling UP at that point of time.
No, that I come later on. This is Hyderabad I'm talking, or the police academy. But then that gave me confidence that, look, I can also do it, right? Even if I faltered many times, but I would just push myself. I would be present for the parades and physical training and everything. So that's a common ground. So that gives you a lot of confidence. Now, what happened is when I went to UP also, more or less it was the same situation. There were 2 or 3 other IPS officers, women officers. And so, when you are of a lesser number, right, you do face a typical set of issues, right? And gender issue is a very common thing.
Right.
So there would be all those things, but then I would not talk so much about it because, see, I was coming from a place where I had got the same training. My response was, okay, I can do it. But then obviously there were a couple of aberrants. So my kind of message to any woman listening out there, any woman, any lady in the audience would be, see, you have to fix your own ethical and sustainable goals in your profession, right? So once you have done that, you have to acquire, if required, because as you go along in the service, whether it's the service or in the corporate world, as you go along in your profession, you need different skills at different points of time. So you should not be lacking on those skills, right? Because you have to give them leadership. What is our role? Our role is basically to give leadership to the force. So we shouldn't be lacking in that. And then the third thing which I talk of is the WWOT syndrome. Women should stay clear of it. Now, what is this WWOT syndrome? What would others think? So, because we are judged much more than our male counterparts, we tend to succumb to this. So my message out there is, please do not succumb. Let them judge you. Let them do whatever they want to do in their own world. Let them think in a particular way. You don't need to react. You need to respond. And the response should be that you have to be steadfast enough in your goals, and ultimately you will win. I have seen it. I have seen it happening all around me. It has happened with me. So that much is very clear. The fourth thing which a woman professional should do is what I call building your own tribe, right? So you need to support every other woman who is trying, who is struggling, who is trying to find her feet. That is very important. There's support groups. You must build up your own support groups. And then the last but not the least, if you face these microaggressions because you are a woman, right, because of your gender, then you must stand up to it. And you will be facing these daily microaggressions because people, move with unconscious biases. Even I may be having a lot of, in fact, I have a very interesting incident, I was going in one of those Indigo flights, and then suddenly it caught my ears that, okay, the captain and the second in command, they called out names of women. For one moment, it just shook me that, oh my God, both are women, what's going to happen? And then my better sense took over me and I said, so what? So what? So, we carry these unconscious biases. We have to be very, very careful about all these biases. And each time we have to tick ourselves off. So these things will be there. And as a woman, you do face an increased number of microaggressions, but then you have to find out your way of responding.
Sure, definitely. And a new term learned, WOTTL, WWT. Definitely. Dr. Anil, it would be great to hear from you as well that in an organization like yours, how do you actually manage diversity and inclusions and make sure that women are also taking equal participation and the other inclusions as well?
Fantastic. So just to bring some twist and some interesting aspect to this entire debate, let me throw a different ball altogether. So let's say any business organization, specifically commercial entities, where meritocratic kind of a value system exists, then probably the reality is who said what is the designation, what is the rank of an individual hardly matters. Now, also the new age e-commerce startups or startupish kind of a culture, you would see there are plenty of chatbots existing, robots existing in the modern organizations. Now, my counter question is, what is the gender of this robot or the chatbots? Is it male, is it female, or is it, I don't know. So probably the limited point I want to bring in here is, So long as we work in a commercial entity, what matters to this organization would be whether I can contribute to the point expected or not, whether I can drive my point, my objective or not. Hardly the gender, hardly my rank and file. In a meritocratic, typically in a meritocratic setup, that doesn't really matter. Now, going back to your second point, whether how organizations are managing diversity of all kind, specifically when we talk about current crisis and how organizations of tomorrow would have more of diversity, more of diverse workforce in their organization, one thing comes to my mind is the gig economy. So specifically globally, if you see, India ranks amongst the top 5 countries as far as the utilization of this gig economy is concerned, or gig workers is concerned. Now that includes diversity of all kind, and people, women and people who are retired, people from diverse fields, they can also join this workforce. Ultimately, because there is a need, there is a demand, and hence it cuts across multiple sector, it cuts across gender, it cuts across the sectors that one comes from. So long as I can add value, I can align my thoughts, my outcomes to the organizational goal, then organizations would want to have more and more of those kind of people, irrespective of gender, irrespective of titles.
Hello. I think I got muted again.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
Hi, Mr. Mahesh Sharma. It was a wonderful thought, Dr. Anil. And Mr. Mahesh, I would like to understand from you, apart from diversity and inclusion, we've also been hearing a lot around emotional intelligence and how sensitized the workforce needs to be. So can you just put your thoughts on that and let us know about emotional intelligence that are needed for the workforce as well?
Well, that's a very, very important question, and it assumes very great significance in the corporate world, because it is not, unfortunately what happens is when we talk of emotional intelligence, like in any other field, we see more of extremes rather than, somebody who's a moderate. Now, let me explain what it means. In business, you cannot just have emotional intelligence. You need to have cognitive intelligence also. You just cannot say that today I'm undergoing a training on coaching and tomorrow onwards I will just wear the hat of a coach. You may have to wear 6 different hats. Okay. In fact, the fact that emotional intelligence is rooted in us, that limbic or the reptilian brain is already in us, it is only a question of how do we use the repertoire of emotions with our cognitive output. Because, like Plato's time, they said that whenever, you deal with people, there have to be 3 things: ethos, pathos, and logos. Your ethics, your passion, and your logic. I think I think any seasoned leader would bear with me out. If you just have emotional intelligence without cognitive intelligence, or without the business priority in mind, it would not cut ice. It would not cut ice. You would be a good guy, but you would not be a person whom I would like to have. So what is important in business world today is, how can I have a moderate, a balanced person? Now, balance does not necessarily mean that you can be skewed, but you will be balanced. There has to be an equilibrium. Now, depending on the situation, how do I flex my style? For example, during the time, let us say there is an epidemic. Everybody, the purpose is very clear. We need to save the world. You ask a person to work for 48 hours, that guy would do it because the purpose is so important. Now, how do you flex a style in this is, when somebody is working round the clock, you cannot say that, I would abide by all the rules and regulations. You would have to flex your style and give a leeway somewhere. You would have to change the rules under unprecedented circumstances. That is where the emotional intelligence becomes very, very important, because the leadership is not about knowing your subject. The leadership is about how do you apply the thing which actually works in that circumstance. Take, for example, today's world. When we have, you talk of artificial intelligence, chatbots, and automation. We talk of Industry 4.0 and, the artificial intelligence today. What is most meaningful is, how can your leader reach out to people who are sitting at home? If you're working from home, if a new joinee joins your organization, he does not have the kind of connect with the people that you had already. So the emotional intelligence here would demand or would warrant that you as a leader reach out, maybe if it is needed, to individuals, to teams and members, in all the time you reserve a time and connect with them, so that they do not feel that they are isolated. They would work, but this is the time when the emotional intelligence can be applied differently for different levels by the leaders. And that could be just a phone call. It could be, sending a bouquet if somebody is not well or somebody's got a birthday. It could be affording them counseling services, services where, today, even the best of the CEOs could be depressed. He could be stressed. It is a different thing that today in our culture, in our kind of an environment, people do not admit that they are stressed. Right. Just because somebody is wearing a smile does not mean, just because somebody is performing does not mean that he's not undergoing some kind of a conflict. So you need to reach out. That is where the leadership is. Today, you should be supporting the people through emotional connect.
Yeah. And a very interesting thought has come to my mind. I think that I would like you to address it, Mr. Mahesh, as well as Mr. Sutapa, if you can also pitch in.
Yeah.
In forces specifically, when you are actually handling life and death matters, how do you maintain this balance that Mr. Sharma is talking about? How do you maintain that emotional intelligence at that point of time?
So who answers first?
I think I would give a rest to my vocal cords. Maybe you can take this.
Mr. Mishra, Dr. Mishra.
Yeah.
I think, Sutapa, that was a question to you.
Okay. So now let us presume that that the police is facing such a situation, right? And this would obviously be a law and order situation, the kind of thing which you put up, Iti. So what happens over there is, you don't think of life and death, right? There is something called legitimate force in policing. So that has to be found out, and it's very different when you're on ground zero, or you're using your hindsight to dissect and do autopsy of a case, compared to the person who's standing there. So I think it is all the cognitive intelligence that you have, all the learnings that you've had over years, how you manage to kind of keep your emotions under control. So there won't be one single factor. Lot many things would be going on inside that person's mind. And I think the bottom line would be, how much force should I use to quell the situation? Something which in police parlance is known, or the magisterial parlance is known as the legitimate force. So I think that is the guiding force, and every situation would be different. Every situation would be different.
Yeah, I completely.
Just to add to, since you had also asked me to give my thoughts on this, thanks to Sutapa, I got some time to think about it, okay, and collect my thoughts. So that was, in fact, it really helped me. I would say, when you are in some situations, one, you cannot build leadership overnight. You have to remain connected with people.
Exactly.
So, and why would somebody who's working with me have trust in me? Okay, why would somebody, when he's under stress, when he's facing a situation, why would he trust in me? I think there are three things which are very important. One is competence. If somebody is fighting with me or somebody is working with me, he knows if he's my leader, he knows my subject well, equally well, or even better. He has the competence to make a decision on my behalf. The second thing I would say is care. If I am hungry, my leader would not eat. My colleague would not eat. He would first feed me, then he would eat. My subordinates, their care, I have to be compassionate about them. Their well-being, their care comes first, and mine comes later. And the third thing is, I talked about the competence and the compassion. And the thing is that if I am not there, if God forbid something happens to me, my brood, my kith and kin, my family would be taken care of. There would be somebody to look after them. Today, when I leave this organization, when I left Air Force, today I can walk into any Air Force organization. I can talk to anybody in Air Force, even after having left that organization, and I would be treated like a brother. How many people in corporate can boast of it?
Absolutely. I think
that's because of the hierarchy also in our organizations. A lot of things, but then everything won't be determined by hierarchy. It will be the personal leadership style. That's what you mean, Mr. Sharma. Yes, and the trust you are able to build, your integrity, how people perceive you, your transparency, and your equal treatment, your fair treatment. You cannot favor a person and somebody in an identical situation, you favor one, reward one, and punish the other one.
Yeah.
Even if the leaders don't perceive, those whom they are leading, they are continuously judging you on these points on the scale. So, yes.
Yeah.
And being a leader also needs, I would not say that it's a sacrifice, but it is a conscious reminder to yourself that there is something beyond your personal comfort or likes.
Yes.
Sometimes you have to lead by example. For that, you come second. The purpose comes first. And that is where, you lead by example. That is how you motivate, because it is not that, the leader says that, okay, everybody should wear masks, but just because he's a leader, he can sit without a mask.
Or are you pointing to somebody? so
from both of you, and I salute to the forces for the kind of the leadership that you guys built, and I think all of us are proud of it. My father is an ex-army person, and he calls us civilians. So we civilians are always proud of our forces, no matter what. And
so you have to walk the talk, basically. What Mr. Sharma, you have to walk the talk. You can't expect the people who you're leading to do something which you are yourself not willing to do. Yeah.
So, Dr. Anil, it's an interesting conversation here going on, and would love to understand some corporate perspective also on this, specifically on the trust part of it. Nowadays, people are facing a lot of trust issues from the corporate side when we are talking to employees, that whether I'm safe in this environment, et cetera, or not. And the corporates, likewise, they are facing the trust issues with the employees, because they are also not knowing that whether they're working from home, not working from home, how's their attendance going on, and things like that. How do you make sure that there is a tendency of very good reciprocation of trust going on?
I think I would tend to disagree that corporates are there is a trust deficit right now, specifically when it comes to work from home. Definitely, that was there. It's not something a new concept. It was existing before. We were allowing across sectors people to work from home, but the extent to which we had this confidence that even enabling functions can do that. That got, probably, it was not, people were not really believing that HR can also be equally, or support functions can also be equally productive working from home. But surprisingly, if you talk about payroll processing, employee engagement, or any such activity, then, zero errors in the payroll processing when people are, across locations, they had to work on payroll processing. But so these are certain examples where work from home was found out equally productive, irrespective of the fact whether you are front of the house or you are back of the house, number one. Number two, during this critical time, most of the managers, I won't call it a trust thing, but see, for business existence, you got to take certain hard call. And hence, let's be very honest, the retrenchment or layoff, that is happening all around us. Now, what typically we thought, and some of the organizations are also doing, is a concept called organizational catharsis. So predominantly what it talks about is allow people to vent out their anger, their anxiety, their frustrations, if any. And to what extent, I develop my colleagues who got to manage this. And trust me, nobody enjoys doing this. But then this activity got to be done. Then how do we prepare our managers? How do we prepare our line managers or probably our colleagues who got to strike a balance between, being assertive and actually executing the task without hurting the dignity of labor, meaning in a very, very respectful manner. Now, one example is, see, we both are friends, and then, I had to do this hard communication with you. And then, that is where I need to play that professional hat, and, I can go ahead and I can say that, hey, this is what it is, and this role no longer exists in the new scheme of thing. And that is where most of the people, they struggle currently in corporate organizations. Having said that, nothing stops me because we have had wonderful colleague relation at work. Then I can say, hey, I can walk an extra mile. I can explore all my potential network, and then can help you out in my individual capacity to find out a job of your interest. I'll walk an extra mile. I'll help you out. I'll share a few leads. And that is where we can actually strike a balance. If I know how to strike a balance, then, probably the trustability, the trustworthiness, that question can be enhanced.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wish that this conversation kept going on, but there is a time limit that we have been given. And there are a few questions, although there has come from the audience. I would love to ask that as well. Mr. Owens has asked specifically to Mrs. Thapa that how is police in India ensuring motivation of the field staff? Are there any trainings involved?
Okay, so yes, trainings are there, but I feel for years the traditional form of policing has been a coercive one, right? But the times have changed now, and then you have different segments of the society, like women, children who are trafficked, who are sexually abused. Well, they are victims. What the policing, the traditional format of policing teaches is coercive policing, accused-centric policing. But for the past 5-6 years, I somehow found that the priorities were not right of policing. We need to shift to a victim-centric policing. Of course, that traditional policing will be there for, say, 10-15% of the population. But, Iti and my co-panelists may agree with me. See, unless there are a larger portion of people in the society who are good, no society is going to last, right? So even if we take the Pareto principle, I would say 80% of the people are good. They look up to the police. They want to work with them. They want to engage with them. So we cannot take away this right or this opportunity from policing. We need to connect to them. We need to do participative policing. And one of the best formats is community policing, where you engage the community in your work. Now, trainings. Yes, trainings are being held. I personally myself also train the police on, of course, gender-sensitive policing and child-friendly policing and anti-human trafficking, because that is my area of core competence. So those trainings are on, but even in those trainings, I do not talk so much about the law, because everybody has access to the internet, and there would be constables in the audience who are far more literate than me. There are double PhD holders in the audience. But I do talk to them about changing their attitude, behavioral change, how they should perceive these people as victims and not treat them as accused. See, then the whole concept changes, the format of policing changes, how you think about the women and child victims, everything changes. So trainings are on, but more important is the change in attitude. So trainings which kind of change the attitude of the police is very, very important.
Right. This I'll open it up for any panel member to take up the next question. What kind of leadership style and attitude is suited to management of multiple teams? What kind of leadership style and attitude is suited to management of multiple teams? Anyone can take it, Mr. Mahesh, Dr. Anil.
I'll take that woman-related question, which comes next, okay?
So I think what we can do is even, I would give a very brief answer to it, and maybe Anil can also share his thoughts on that. But I think, first of all, we should be like a transformer. We should be able to flex our leadership style depending on in case of a multiple team, especially because it's a diverse team. All right. A leader would not be any longer sitting on the apex of a pyramid. The leader would be in a distributed system, sitting at a node who's connected in a network-centric environment. So it is like you have different nodes. You're connecting to them. You are more of an integrator.
Right.
Your core connections will define your leadership. And in multiple teams, that is very, very important to have those core connections, multiple connections, distributed connections at all times. You should be actually network enabled. And attitude, the all-time sellout for attitude is a positive attitude. You should keep your doors open. Be open to information coming in. If you shut the doors, you are not going to lead. It is not going to lead anywhere.
Sure.
As a leader, doors should be open in a multiple system.
Absolutely.
Just to Mahesh, a very 30-second one. Typically, when you have a distributed workforce across geographies, then, for a specific project, this is what in management parlance, we call it matrix organization, where there are, existence of multiple command system, meaning, the decision is not centralized. Basis the project, each of the people can, take a call. And, it also cuts across layers. And anybody whosoever is the project lead, takes charge and, kind of drives the things there.
Yeah, wonderful. Ma'am, the next question is again.
I've noted it down. Yeah. What type of sensitization is required for men in an office or job site? So basically, whoever has asked this question is talking about the workplace and the women workers. So what kind of sensitization? Yes. How to deal with women co-workers, that is very important. And so, in fact, I have been doing this. I have been taking trainings on the POSH Act, which is the Prevention of Sexual Harassment at Workplace for Women. But that is just one part of it, right? So apart from sexual harassment, there has to be a kind of a format in which co-workers would interact with each other. And, we are looking at a workplace where adults are working. So if we have to go back, it goes back into the kind of parenting which we are doing for our boys, right? So for women and for the girl, there are all kinds of restrictions, all kinds of notes, all kinds of sticky notes, do this, do that. But then how are we bringing up our boys? Are we making them gender sensitive right from the beginning so that they become sensitive men when they become adults? So that we need to keep going back, So that is one point, that is one node. I'll say it's just a node where both adult men and women are coming together. Of course, for the sexual harassment part, it's given in detail in that act, that 2013 act, which came after the Nirbhaya incident, Justice Verma report, right? So that is there. But then the other things, they have to be started right from the beginning. And in this, parenting becomes very important.
Sure, definitely. I will move on to the next question quickly. How do you manage a large distributed workforce remotely, particularly when you don't have a technical infrastructure in place?
So very quickly, there are two things that we need to keep in our mind, specifically when you have a distributed workforce and work from home. Number one, how strong is your performance management system? If you believe in driving a performance management culture, then which location, whether people are working from home, they are working from office, that has very, very limited usage there. So long as I know that this is what I got to be driving, and my KRAs are divided into my quarterly deliverables, my OKRs, everything is well articulated, and every day we go for stand-up meeting, and I know what are the stuff I got to be doing in the morning, and every day evening I take a stock of as against my promise, what and where am I. And if I can articulate, I can create a documentation and share that with my manager, then probably nobody would have those kind of a question. So long story cut short, nobody really bothers whether you are working, you have punched in for 12 hours, working from office or working from home. So long as your deliverables you achieve, the short terms, it's good enough. But in this current scenario, we would not see more of annual rituals in form of annual appraisal and things like that. Rather, it would be cascaded to quarterly targets and probably monthly targets, and that's how things are managed. And that's the future, and hence definitely it is here to stay. Having said that, in work from home, I see in the future there would be more and more people relying on working from home, precisely for 4 reasons. I call it, in short, STOP, wherein S stands for social distancing, T stands for the travel time or the commute time, irrespective of whether you are in NCR or you are in Bangalore or Chennai. The research data that tells us that 20 to 30% of our time we spend commuting, and hence it's a win-win proposition, and hence it's here to stay. O stands for the office occupancy. Nobody would want to really invest, and that is what is the trend we are seeing all around us. That less dependency on consolidation and having a corporate office at one location versus having it spread across different cities. And P for, of course, the pollution also plays a big role in promoting work from home. So because of these reasons, I strongly believe that work from home will be in high demand in future, and performance-driven culture, as I said, will only focus on the deliverables. Whatever I promised, did I deliver? Whether I did it on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, 12 hours, nobody bothers.
It's acronym you've coined. Stop.
That's a wonderful one. There are many questions that are coming in, but the time is pretty restrictive for us. And I would like our panel members to leave the audience with last few words of advice for managing the large workforce. If you can just start with Mahesh Sharma, if you would like to start that.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I would just, taking the thread from where Anil left, I think there would be some organizations, because if I see the question, and I would summarize my thought, partly taking into account that question, when you don't have a technical infrastructure, because there would be certain struggling companies, or there would be certain industries where they may not have that kind of a technical expertise or infrastructure. So I would say for those in such times of need where you have to manage remote workforce with lack of these things, I think your SOPs, your standard operating procedures, your checklists should be very, very robust. They should be non-negotiable so that people don't have to refer to you time and again and there is no delay. The second thing is that your local empowerment, the delegation of authority to take local decisions will have to be more. They would have to be delegated furthermore, because the times are unprecedented. So you would have to kind of delegate it furthermore. And the third thing is, we operated even during that phase when we had snail mail. So how do you communicate? How do you maintain the lines of communication? Whether by field visits more often, so that you have a direct connect with the people. Those are the things that would partly answer the question. But coming back to your point, in the virtual landscape where you are entirely on a virtual medium, I think, like Anil said, tasks would be done. People would rise to the occasion. They would work once the deliverables are clear. but to have that connect where your personal influence or core connections make all the difference. It's not your core competency, but the kind of network and your influence, and that cannot be built overnight. For that, you need to continuously in touch. So you may have your schedule that today I would connect with so many people at so and so site. The leader would have to design some kind of a system where he remains connected with people, know their pain points, and attend to them. Because it is how you treat them during the time of need they would remember for their life.
Absolutely inspiring. Ma'am, would you like to address the audience and your word of advice to them?
Well, it would be very a short take. The first thing is self-care. So stay happy, because if you are not happy, you cannot keep the people who are working with you happy. So stay happy. Secondly, stay connected, because this is a time, we do use the word social distancing and that, but it's very important to stay connected. And third, walk the talk. Whatever a leader wants the others to do, he or she must do it himself or herself. That's it.
So, Dr. Anil.
Yeah, my piece of advice would be, it's very, very important to be positive. So hence, stay positive. We have seen slowdowns. We have seen, much more difficulty in the past. So nothing new. So being positive is very, very important at this stage. Staying safe is also equally important. When we know the new norm is, we have to peacefully coexist with the virus. Till the time, you do not have a vaccine. If that is the new norm, what is that, I can do to safeguard myself as well as my, colleagues in the office space. So that is very, very important. And even this sun pass away, that's what, hope. That's what we all can expect. And staying positive, staying healthy, and being in touch with people, staying networked, well networked, exchanging thoughts, getting into more of this, webinars should help us out.
Amazing thoughts and very, very inspiring words from all of you. And it was wonderful having all of you on the panel. Mrs. Uthappa, Dr. Anil, Mr. Mahesh Sharma. It was a wonderful discussion, I think. And I wish that there was more time that was given to us so that we can learn more from all of you. At the end of it, would like to sum it up. And specifically, I would like to thank the audience also. Thank you so much for spending so much time over here. Speaking, thank you so much for arranging this excellent webinar. This webinar has been arranged by Speakin, and we have to make sure that this keeps on going on. So at the end of it, I would just like to add and sum it up with that we're convinced that there's nothing more important, I think, than hiring the right people and developing them. That's even more important. And you can bet on the people, but not on the strategies. That's what we should be looking forward to. So thank you so much.